Good morning. Thank you, Tor. Dear friends of human rights, for me it's a pleasure to open this year's Oslo Freedom Forum, and thank you to Tor for this very compelling and persuading opening remarks. Preparing for this conference, I was very pleased to learn that the title of this year's forum, Living in Truth, was inspired by an essay by Václav Havel, the Czech author and political dissident. Havel inspired many people around the world, including myself. 30 years ago, when I was a student, in 1985, we started a campaign here in Oslo to free Václav Havel. We demonstrated outside the embassy of Czechoslovakia here in Oslo, and we called our campaign, Books Can Be Dangerous. Václav Havel's story is a story of hope. Like Nelson Mandela, Havel went from being a prisoner under a regime with severe human rights abuses to later being president of a country that strived to protect human rights. From the prison cell to the presidential palace, the personal stories of Mandela and Havel became symbols of the larger changes in their countries. But their personal stories also became symbols of hope and encouragement for political prisoners and human rights defenders all around the world. The title of this year's conference, Living in Truth, comes from Havel's essay, The Power of the Powerless. Written in 1978, at the time when Europe was divided by walls and weapons. In the essay, Havel illustrates the dilemmas of living in an authoritarian regime with the example of a greengrocer, a shopkeeper. The shopkeeper is obliged to put up a sign with a regime-friendly slogan in his shop. But to him, this represents a lie. The shopkeeper then has a choice to put up the sign, or he can choose to live in truth and not display the sign. Such an act will put himself at risk, but it will also expose the lie that the authoritarian regime is based on. Many people, as Tor mentioned, around the world living in authoritarian regimes today face similar choices: to either go along with the system or stand up against it. But standing up is often hard. It takes courage. Because in many places around the world, living in truth does not come for free. And as many here in the audience knows, speaking truth to power can sometimes come with a very heavy price. And we also saw the appalling situation for former speakers at the Oslo Forum, and the passing of one of the brave dissidents from Yemen is a stark reminder of that fact. Sometimes brave men and women must pay the price for the freedom of many. It is the responsibility of states to protect the human rights of citizens. Nevertheless, human rights are today under pressure. We see this in all parts of the world, in the Middle East, in Africa, in Asia, and even in parts of Europe where we did not expect this happening. There is an increasing gap between the formal commitments to human rights that states have made and the respect for human rights on the ground. Some civil and political rights, like freedom of expression and freedom of assembly, are particularly under pressure. These are important rights in and of itself, but they are also important for the fulfillment of other human rights. Lack of implementation of human rights is often partly due to lack of means and weak systems to enforce these rights, but it is also often due to lack of political will. Some countries actively undermine human rights, but the worsening human rights situation can also be due to conflict. These are turbulent times. 2014 was a year of crisis. ISIL, Syria, Ukraine, Libya were just some of the headlines. As a foreign minister, I sometimes feel like I'm running from one crisis to the next. But these crises and the current pressure on human rights are part of the same story. Where there is conflict, human rights often come under pressure. And where human rights are under pressure, crisis is often brewing. Miners used to bring a canary with them down to the mines. If the bird passed out, they knew danger was looming. It was time to get out. Just like the canary passing out, a worsening human rights situation is often a telling sign of impending crisis. In South Sudan, we witnessed an increase in the human rights violations before the conflict broke out. We must learn to both recognize and respond to these signs. The UN Secretary General's initiative, the Rights Up Front, is an excellent initiative in this respect. Whenever we see human rights being violated, worst thing is expected. That's why we have to address this at a very early and nascent state. But unlike the miners, we should not head for the exit when faced with danger. We should do the opposite. The international community should step up its efforts to promote and defend human rights. The freedom of expression is one of the most basic, most important, and unfortunately most threatened human rights of our time. As we gather here today in Oslo, several hundred journalists are imprisoned globally because they speak up against injustice. And according to the Committee to Protect Journalists, over 60 journalists died last year because they refused to be silenced. This is completely unacceptable in the 21st century. The appalling attacks we witnessed in Paris and Copenhagen this spring serve as a stark reminders that the freedom of expression must never be taken for granted. Freedom of expression is a right, but it is also a tool for protecting other rights, as it is essential in disclosing violations of other human rights. The internet is increasingly important in this regard. A tool for human rights defenders and democracy fighters. Some states use sovereignty and non-interference to promote increased state control over the internet. The same arguments that have been used against the promotion of human rights and democracy. But universal human rights are as valid online as they are offline. Human rights defenders from every corner of the world keep us informed and engaged. They remind us of our duty to act and of the cost of our inaction. As pressure on human rights increases, so does pressure on human rights defenders. Norway remains concerned and committed to the cause of human rights defenders. Under our leadership, the UN General Assembly adopted the first ever human resolution on human rights defenders in 2013. We intend to follow up this fall. We must all make better use of the UN commitments that states have signed up to. We must hold each other accountable and grasp the gap between formal commitments to human rights and respect for human rights on the ground. As in Havel's time, human rights are under pressure. Now as then, some dismiss human rights as being Western values. But human rights are common and fundamental rights for us all. Of course, there must be respect for cultural differences. But what about the right to be different? The right to love the person you want? The right to choose whatever religion you want, or no religion? The right to say whatever you want. We need to, yet again, state a basic truth. Human rights are the rights of every woman and every man on every continent. Human rights are as universal as humanity itself. Thank you.